To bring up the co-director of the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at University of California, San Diego, Dr. Atkinson.
Thanks for the kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here. I can, just as I was about to have everything launched, I somehow got into a predicament where I can't get the slides to show.
You have to put down the music, please. Can we turn off that music? Yeah.
So, once my incompetence is revealed and the slides can come up, I'll talk to you a bit about informally, and so please feel free to ask questions. Here's what I'd planned was simply to review the history of how the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at the University of California was formed, just a bit of the background, and then go through our findings. We commenced in the year 2000 and then have just concluded our last study this past December. So a little bit about our history, the approval process for conducting this kind of research, and then I'll just present the main findings of the center, and then try to update a little bit on where do we go from here. Is that kind of what you had in mind?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Can I get out of the way? Okay. Can everyone see around me or through me enough to start? Okay. So, just by way of backgrounds in the run-up to the initiation of the CMCR, the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. Of course, in the late 90s, there was a great scientific reawakening in interest in medicinal cannabis. Part of it was because these anecdotal reports of its health benefits just wouldn't go away. And second was that there was some flexibility and that some states began to consider the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. And then on the scientific front, this inbuilt natural endocannabinoid system was discovered, and it was noted that there were cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2 receptors, one in the brain and one mostly in the peripheral nervous system. It was noted that anandamide was a natural neurotransmitter, that THC happened to also attach to the same receptor sites. And then there were the development of synthetic molecules. THC itself was synthesized, and then other molecules involved in the metabolism of THC and similar signaling. So just as a quick review then, in terms of function, this CB1 receptor has a huge range of functions that range from basics like memory and learning and appetitive behavior. That is, sucklings in newborn rodents need that CB1 receptor, or you just don't have that appetite behavior to start feeding yourself or being fed. And then it's also the CB1 receptor, also very important for time sense, attention to spatial memory, reward mechanisms in the brain, and then also a very high-level executive functions like synthesis, planning, abstraction, appreciation of the world around us, and only the way that we can do, we think. So not only is there a lot of functional attributes of the CB1 receptor, but it's very widespread, as you can see. There are really key elements all over the brain, from the cortex, where we do our thinking, to the basal ganglia, where we have our motor activities centered, hippocampus important for memory. So you can see how widespread this endocannabinoid system is and how crucial it is for mental processing. So right before the CMCR was initiated, there were a series of studies at the Institute of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and the National Institute of Health that seemed to indicate that there was reason to study medical marijuana for its potential role in appetite enhancement for people with cancer or HIV infection, to suppress nausea and vomiting and chemotherapy, for pain relief, and also for control of muscle spasm and pain in multiple sclerosis. And these targets were identified by these very prestigious panels. So the center itself, of course, had a legal background in Prop 215. And then in 1999, the Medical Marijuana Research Act was spearheaded by a very visionary senator, Senator John Vasconcellos, who said, well, listen, we've approved the use of medical marijuana. Really, what's the evidence? What's the evidence that it really works for anything on a scientific basis? And so that was the origin of this Medical Marijuana Research Act that ultimately led to 10 years of funding for the CMCR to do its work. So we had a mission, and the mission was to do scientific research of the highest quality and to collaborate with federal, state, and local entities and other academic centers in the conduct of this research. We thought there might be 3 stages to our work. One was simply to study smoked cannabis, because that's what the legislation said. They didn't want synthetic marijuana. They wanted marijuana cigarettes. And so that was what we were going to use as our treatment vehicle. And then we were because of the hazards and the questions about inhaling combusted material, smoking that is, we were also given some leeway to study the delivery of cannabis by vaporized methods. And then finally, we had hoped to proceed to stage 3, which is really more of a pharmaceutical approach to the cannabinoids. So I won't belabor this point, but I just wanted to show you the process that we went through for the approval of each and every one of these studies. We ended up mounting about 15 different studies, and each of them had to go through this approval process. So the CMCR was given money to solicit other academic and private public centers to send us research proposals. And we formed a scientific review panel of nationally and internationally renowned scientists who would review each of the studies. And so up in the very left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see this Scientific Review Board, SRB, review. So they made comments back to the scientists and helped them improve their protocol. And then after it was approved by our Scientific Review Board, it went to the California Research Advisory Panel, and they made their comments on our research proposals. And then from there it went to the Department of Health and Human Services, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and then finally after this scientific review, yes? Will the volume go up? Will it go up? Is this better? Yeah. Okay, sorry. So after there was a scientific review, then the Drug Enforcement Agency would come to each of the research sites. We had to do all our work in a clinical research center in the hospital itself, and they had to be sure we had adequate custody and chain of command of the cannabis. And now we got our cannabis from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, they have a contract with the University of Mississippi, and they have a giant farm where they investigate botanical agents of all sorts for therapeutic uses, and cannabis was one of them. So we would order, once the scientists said what strength of cannabis cigarettes they wanted, they would make up the cigarettes for the protocol and then ship them to the scientists. And they also, so we also needed to have in any research of a therapeutic intervention, particularly since we focused on pain, you have to have placebo cigarettes. That is, cigarettes that smell like the real thing, taste like the real thing, but from which the THC has been leached out. And that's our control, simply because, particularly for pain, about 1 out of every 3 people has a brain system that can turn on very powerfully just with the act of being given a medication to take, or in this case a placebo cigarette to smoke, and they will suppress pain by about 30 to 50%. It's just a native ability of some individual's nervous system. There's a Nobel Prize there, of course, but you've got to be able to beat the placebo to say that you've done anything. So that was the first study took about 1.5 years to get, for any individual studies, to win their way through this process. Everyone was very cordial and very helpful, but it's just a lot of hoops. But after several of these, we got it down to about 1 year per study. And we studied, focused primarily on a condition called neuropathic pain, because that was one of that's where the Institute of Medicine said that probably had a very good chance of success. And neuropathic pain is common in HIV disease, it's common in diabetes, after injury to a nerve from, say, a car accident. So it's a disease of the nerves, either centrally in the brain or in the peripheral nervous system, say, particularly the feet and the legs. It's a kind of a painful, tingling, abnormal sensation that just will not go away, and it's just very, very disturbing. And so, for example, maybe a quarter of people with diabetes will develop this condition, maybe 20% of people with HIV infection. So it's just very, very common and very difficult to treat. Doesn't respond very well to standard approaches. We also studied muscle spasms and multiple sclerosis. We had protocols on to help with cancer chemotherapy, nausea, and vomiting, and then a sprinkling of other studies with, as mentioned, with vaporized rather than smoked cannabis. Yes.
You say it helps with spasticity of multiple sclerosis. You know if they did anything like with Parkinson's disease, like the shape that you did?
No, we didn't study Parkinson's. Most of the work is actually has been done with multiple sclerosis, particularly in Great Britain and the United Kingdom. And so and there was some encouraging evidence there, so we took on that. Although we proposed some studies on cancer chemotherapy, nausea, and vomiting, we closed those out after about 1 year or 2 each because they really couldn't recruit to the study. There were 2 problems. One is that you had to be in the hospital to participate in the research, and of course if you have cancer you spend enough time in a hospital, so you don't want to go to the hospital. And the second one was that the modern treatments for cancer chemotherapy were pretty good, and the final kind of really telling argument was that for these studies you couldn't have already been on cannabis. You had to be naive to it so we could test to see whether it worked, and nearly everybody who had failed on standard treatment had already taken up cannabis. So we just couldn't recruit anybody to those studies, and sad to say, so we just closed them down for non-performance. So, we ended up with study sites at 6 places, UC San Francisco, UC Davis, a Stanford-affiliated hospital in San Mateo, and then UCSD, UCLA, and UC Irvine. So we had a nice distribution of scientists who applied for funding and were awarded work. So